For years, I lived with unwavering certainty in my faith, a deep-rooted belief that shaped every aspect of my life. As an imam, I devoted myself to guiding others, offering spiritual counsel, and reinforcing the principles I had been raised to uphold. My faith was my foundation, my identity, and my purpose. I had no reason to question what I had always believed to be the ultimate truth. But life has a way of shaking even the strongest convictions, and I was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew. It all began when I received the devastating news. I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors were clear. My time was limited, and the treatments available offered little hope. I turned to my faith as a source of comfort, believing that this was merely a test from Allah, much like the trials faced by the prophets before me. I held on to my prayers, whispered verses from the Quran, and sought solace in the knowledge that my suffering had a divine purpose. But deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow. One fateful night, after an exhausting chemotherapy session, something happened that would change my life forever. A sudden, unbearable tightness gripped my chest, and within moments, darkness consumed me. I was no longer in my body. I was floating above it, watching as doctors and nurses frantically worked to revive me. It was surreal. My consciousness remained intact even though my heart had stopped beating. As I hovered above the scene, I felt a pull, a force drawing me towards something beyond this world. In the distance, a radiant light appeared, unlike anything I had ever seen. It was warm, inviting, filled with an overwhelming sense of peace. I felt weightless as I moved toward it, hearing voices that carried familiar echoes from my past. My mother's lullabies, my father's evening prayers, and the rhythmic recitations of the Quran all blended together in a symphony of memories. At that moment, I thought I had reached paradise, the place I had spent my life longing for. But just as I was embracing this newfound peace, everything changed. The warmth faded, replaced by an eerie coldness that sent a shiver through my being. The once lush surroundings withered, and an unsettling darkness swallowed everything. Voices of anguish filled the air, cries of men, women, and children in unimaginable torment. Among them, I heard a voice that cut through the chaos, piercing my soul with sorrow. It was my mother's. She was weeping, crying out for mercy. The pain in her voice shattered me. As I tried to make sense of what was happening, I saw something that left me in utter shock. A massive throne loomed ahead, high and imposing, with a figure seated upon it. I strained my eyes, and to my disbelief I recognized him. It was the Prophet Muhammad, but something was wrong. His hands were bound in chains, his face filled with sorrow. A powerful voice echoed through the void, announcing, "Everything will now be revealed." Before I could respond, a book fell from the sky, crashing onto the ground with an intensity that sent tremors through the darkness. It was the Quran. The pages began turning on their own as if guided by an unseen force. The voice spoke again, questioning me in a way I had never been questioned before. "Who is Allah, Ahmed? Have you ever truly asked yourself that?" The voice's question struck me like a bolt of lightning. It was a question so simple, yet so profound, that I felt the very ground beneath me tremble. Who is Allah, Ahmed? For my entire life, I had believed I knew the answer. Allah was the creator of all things, the most merciful, the most compassionate. But the voice persisted, asking me how I knew this to be true. It wasn't challenging me with anger or mockery. Rather, it was urging me to confront something I had never dared to question. My mind raced, searching for a response, but for the first time, I felt unsure. The Quran before me continued flipping its pages, revealing visions that shook me to my core. I saw images of the Kaaba, but not as I had always known it. Instead of the sacred house of monotheism, it was surrounded by idols, and people were worshipping them, burning incense, making offerings, and invoking names I had never paid much attention to. Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. These were the gods worshipped by the Arabs before Islam. The voice spoke again. Where was Allah among these gods? My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to resist, to push these thoughts away, but I couldn't deny the truth unfolding before me. I had always believed Islam brought the world true monotheism, yet the vision before me revealed a different story. The pre-Islamic Arabs had already believed in Allah, but as one God among many. Had I been taught an incomplete history? The realization sent a cold chill through me. I had spent decades defending the purity of my faith, but now I was seeing layers I had never been encouraged to examine. The voice then guided me to another vision, one from a time long before Islam. A towering idol stood in a distant land, surrounded by people offering sacrifices. Inscribed at its base was a name I instantly recognized, Baal. But beneath it, in a script that bore resemblance to Arabic, another name appeared, El. A shudder ran through me as the voice whispered, Baal, El. Allah. Have you ever considered their connection? My breath caught in my throat. Was Allah's name linked to these ancient gods? I wanted to scream, to reject what I was seeing, but I couldn't. The evidence was right in front of me. My entire identity had been built upon Islam, yet now I felt as if the foundation of my belief was cracking beneath my feet. The voice wasn't trying to frighten me. It was urging me to seek truth beyond what I had been told. My entire body trembled, overwhelmed by the weight of these revelations. I was no longer certain of anything. As I stood there, lost in a whirlwind of doubt, the scene around me began to fade. The throne, the prophet, the Quran, they all disappeared into darkness. Suddenly, I felt a pull, as though I were being yanked back into my body. My eyes shot open and I gasped for air. The blinding hospital lights burned into my retinas, and I heard voices calling my name. Nurses and doctors surrounded me, their faces filled with relief. "He's back," one of them whispered. But I was not the same man I had been before. Lying in that hospital bed, I felt hollow, as if something had been ripped from me. My faith, once an unshakable pillar of my identity, now felt fragile. I tried to push the experience away, to tell myself it was just a hallucination caused by the trauma of dying. But deep inside, I knew better. It had been too real, too vivid. Every detail, every word from that voice echoed in my mind, refusing to be ignored. I had spent my entire life answering questions about faith, but for the first time, I had no answers for myself. I thought about my life as an imam, the sermons I had preached, the people I had counseled, the unwavering faith I had defended. How could I stand before my congregation now? How could I tell them to believe without question when I was questioning everything? The mere thought of returning to my old life filled me with unease. I had built my reputation on certainty, yet now I was drowning in doubt. The weight of it pressed down on me like an unbearable burden. Days turned into weeks, and I withdrew into myself. My wife, Fatima, noticed my turmoil, though I couldn't bring myself to tell her what was truly troubling me. At night, I would sit awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind tormented by the visions I had seen. I longed for peace, but the doubts refused to leave me. I had spent years teaching that faith required submission, but was submission enough when questions still remained? One evening, as I sat alone in my study, I reached for a Quran. My hands trembled as I opened it, searching for reassurance, for something that would reaffirm my beliefs. But instead of comfort, I found myself reading the verses with a newfound awareness. The words that had once given me solace now felt different, as if they were being questioned in real time. Every passage I read made me think back to that voice, to the question, who is Allah? I started researching in secret. At first, it was just brief readings into the history of pre-Islamic Arabia. Then, I found myself diving deeper, exploring the origins of monotheism, the evolution of ancient religious beliefs, and even the historical context of the Quran's revelations. The more I read, the more uneasy I became. I had spent decades warning my congregation against such inquiries, yet now I was devouring the very knowledge I had once feared. My inner conflict grew unbearable. I felt like a traitor to my own beliefs, yet I couldn't stop myself. Every new discovery was another crack in the foundation of my faith. Had I been blind all these years? Had I ignored the very questions that so many others had secretly struggled with? The realization was terrifying, but even more terrifying was the thought of what lay ahead. I was standing at a crossroads and there was no turning back. One night, as I stared at the Quran lying open before me, I whispered a desperate prayer. Allah, if you are truly there, guide me to the truth. But in my heart, I knew that prayer carried a different weight than before. I wasn't asking for confirmation of what I had always believed. I was asking for truth, no matter where it led me. And deep inside, I feared where that path might take me. In the weeks that followed my near-death experience, Doubt became my constant companion. It clung to me in moments of silence, whispered in my mind during prayers, and surfaced in every conversation I had with those around me. I tried to ignore it, to drown it in the familiarity of routine, but the weight of my questions was unbearable. The more I tried to suppress them, the louder they became. I felt like a man trapped between two worlds, the faith I had built my life upon, and the unsettling truths that now haunted me. My wife, Fatima, noticed the change in me. She was a woman of unwavering faith, someone who had always found comfort in prayer and scripture. At first, she assumed my restlessness was caused by my illness, the exhaustion of chemotherapy taking its toll. But as time passed, she began to sense that something deeper was troubling me. One evening, as we sat in our small garden, she reached for my hand and asked, "Ahmed, what is it? You've been so distant." I wanted to tell her everything, but I hesitated. How could I put into words the crisis I was facing? Instead, I shook my head and forced a weak smile. "It's nothing," I lied. But Fatima knew me too well. She squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with concern. "You're not the same," she whispered. She was right. I wasn't. The man she had married, the imam, the teacher, the man who had once stood so firm in his convictions, was unraveling before her eyes. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to admit the truth. Not yet. The real battle wasn't just within me. It was also in the expectations of those around me. I had spent years as a leader in my community. People looked to me for guidance, for certainty. How could I stand before them now when I wasn't sure what I believed anymore? The thought of facing them made my stomach twist with unease. Would they see the doubt in my eyes? Would they sense the fear in my voice? And if they did, what would become of me? I tried to find solace in the scriptures, hoping to rekindle the faith that once came so easily. But each time I opened the Quran, I felt disconnected from its words. Passages I had memorized since childhood now felt different, as if they carried a meaning I had never fully grasped before. I questioned verses I had once recited without a second thought. The voice from my vision echoed in my mind. Who is Allah? The more I searched for reassurance, the more distant my faith became. One night, as I lay awake in bed, I whispered to the darkness, "What if everything I've believed isn't true?" The thought terrified me. I had built my entire life upon Islam. My identity, my purpose, my family. It was all connected to my faith. If I let go of it, what would remain? Who would I be? But another voice inside me spoke, softer, yet unrelenting. What if the truth is waiting for you beyond your fear? I didn't have an answer yet, but one thing was certain. I couldn't ignore this any longer. I had to seek the truth, no matter where it led me. And for the first time, I accepted the possibility that the journey ahead might take me somewhere I had never expected to go. As I continued my search, I realized something unsettling. I had spent my entire life discouraging others from asking the very questions I was now facing. I remembered conversations with young men and women in my community, those who had come to me with doubts about faith, only for me to dismiss them with rehearsed answers. I had told them that faith required submission, that questioning too much was a sign of weakness. But was it? Or had I simply been too afraid to question things myself? One particular memory stood out. A young woman named Sarah had approached me years ago, asking why women had fewer rights in Islam. She spoke with intelligence and sincerity, but instead of engaging in honest discussion, I had given her the standard response: Allah knows best. We must trust His wisdom. I remembered the look in her eyes, the frustration mixed with disappointment. She never returned to the mosque after that conversation. Had I failed her? Had I failed them all? I thought of my own children. My eldest son, Kareem, had once asked me, "Why does Allah allow suffering?" At the time, I had told him what I had been taught. Trials purify us. We must trust in His divine plan. But now, I found myself asking the same question. If Allah was truly merciful, why did so many suffer without relief? Why did injustice persist? Why did faith demand unquestioning obedience rather than understanding? I began reading beyond the texts I had always known. I explored historical accounts, early Islamic writings, and even theological discussions from other faiths. The more I read, the more I realized how much I had never considered before. Islam had always been presented to me as the final and perfect truth. But what if my understanding of that truth had been incomplete? There were moments when fear gripped me, moments when I wanted to close the books and return to the comfort of familiarity. But the voice from my vision wouldn't let me. Who is Allah? That question had unlocked something within me, a hunger for truth that could no longer be silenced. One evening, as I sat in my study, my wife entered the room. She looked at the books surrounding me, at the open texts on my desk. Her eyes filled with worry. "Ahmed, what are you doing?" she asked. For a long time I said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, I finally spoke the words I had been afraid to admit. I am searching for the truth. My journey for truth took an unexpected turn when I met Dr. Thompson, my oncologist. She was a kind woman, intelligent and compassionate. Over time, we had built a rapport, often discussing life beyond my medical condition. One day, during a routine appointment, she noticed my troubled expression and asked what was weighing on my heart. For the first time, I found myself opening up to someone outside my faith. I hesitated before speaking, but something about her presence made me feel safe. "I've been questioning things," I admitted. Things I never thought I would question. She didn't react with shock or judgment. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. "That's not a bad thing, Ahmed. It means you're searching." She shared her own story, how she had grown up in a strict religious household, expected to follow faith without question. But as she studied science and philosophy, she began to seek deeper understanding. Her journey led her to a different kind of faith, one that embraced both reason and belief. "Truth is not afraid of questions," she told me. "It invites them." Her words lingered with me long after that conversation. For so long, I had believed that questioning faith was dangerous, that doubt was a sign of weakness. But what if the opposite was true? What if the strongest faith was the one willing to be tested? I left that appointment with a new perspective. Maybe my questions weren't signs of betrayal. Maybe they were the first steps toward something greater. And as I walked out of the hospital that day, I felt a sense of resolve I hadn't felt before. After my conversation with Dr. Thompson, my search for truth became an obsession. I spent hours in my study, poring over texts I had once considered forbidden. I was no longer just reading religious scriptures. I was delving into history, archaeology, and comparative theology. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I had never questioned before. Islam had always been presented to me as the final revelation, the ultimate truth. But now I began to see a more complex picture, one with layers I had never dared to explore. The weight of my research was suffocating, and yet I couldn't stop. I questioned everything: the origins of monotheism, the evolution of religious texts, even the concept of divine revelation itself. My mind was at war with my heart. I still wanted to believe, but I could no longer ignore the doubts clawing at my soul. Each night, as I lay in bed beside Fatima, I wondered if she could sense the turmoil raging within me. One evening, as I sat alone in the garden, staring at the stars, my youngest daughter, Amira, joined me. She was only 16, yet she carried a wisdom beyond her years. She sat beside me in silence for a long time before finally speaking. "Baba, is it wrong to change what you believe if you learn something new?" The simplicity of her question took my breath away. For years I had told others to hold fast to their faith, to never waver. But what if true faith wasn't about holding on, but about seeking truth, no matter where it led? I turned to her and smiled, though my heart felt heavy. "I don't know," I admitted. It was the first time I had spoken those words aloud. The first time I had confessed, even to myself, that I no longer had all the answers. Amira nodded, as if she understood something I couldn't yet see. "I think Allah would want us to seek truth, Baba. If He is real, then truth will always lead to Him." Her words stayed with me long after she had gone inside. Could it be that my doubts were not a betrayal of faith, but a step towards something greater? Could it be that truth was not something to be feared, but something to be pursued with all my heart? The thought terrified me, yet for the first time I felt a strange sense of peace. That night, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I knelt down in prayer, not out of habit, but out of desperation. "God, if you are real, show me the truth. No matter what it is, no matter where it leads, I will follow." As I whispered those words, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't have the answers yet, but I had taken the first step. The days that followed were filled with a quiet intensity. I continued my research, but now I approached it differently. I was no longer searching to confirm what I had always believed. I was searching for truth, no matter where it led me. It was a terrifying, yet exhilarating realization. The walls of certainty that had once surrounded me were crumbling, but instead of fear, I felt an unexpected sense of freedom. One afternoon, I found myself in the hospital chapel. It was a small, simple room, designed for people of all faiths to find solace. I had walked past it many times, but today, something drew me inside. I sat in the back, watching as people came and went, some praying, some weeping, some simply sitting in silence. I saw a Christian man clutching a Bible, his lips moving in whispered prayer. A Buddhist woman sat in quiet meditation, her face serene despite the pain I knew she must be enduring. A Jewish doctor paused to pray before returning to his rounds. Each of them was seeking God in their own way. For the first time in my life, I wondered, could it be that truth was bigger than any one religion? Could it be that God had revealed himself in ways I had never considered? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I had always been taught that Islam was the only true path, but what if I had been wrong? As I sat there, lost in thought, a man approached me. He wore a simple white robe and carried a Bible in his hands. "You look troubled," he said gently. His voice was calm, filled with a kindness I hadn't expected. I hesitated before speaking, but something in his presence made me feel safe. "I've been searching for answers," I admitted, "and I don't know where to turn." The man nodded, as if he understood. "That's a good place to be," he said. "Truth is not afraid of questions." He sat beside me and opened his Bible. "Have you ever considered Jesus?" The question caught me off guard. Jesus? In all my searching, I had not yet thought to look there. I had always been taught that he was only a prophet, not the Son of God. But what if there was more to his story than I had been told? The man turned to a passage in the Gospel of John and read aloud, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." The words sent a jolt through my heart. I had heard them before, but never like this. For the first time, I wasn't dismissing them. I was truly listening. Something inside me stirred, something I couldn't explain. Was this the truth I had been searching for? I didn't know yet. But one thing was certain. I could no longer ignore it. My journey was far from over, but I had reached a turning point. I was no longer just questioning my faith. I was opening my heart to the possibility of something entirely new. For days after my encounter in the chapel, I found myself drawn back to the words the man had spoken. "Have you ever considered Jesus?" The question lingered in my mind, unsettling me in ways I couldn't yet understand. I had spent my entire life believing that Jesus was only a prophet, a revered figure in Islam, but nothing more. The idea that he could be something greater, something more than what I had been taught, was foreign to me. And yet, I could not shake the feeling that I had been led to this moment for a reason. I tried to push the thoughts away, to immerse myself in my daily routines. But even in prayer, my mind wandered back to that verse from the Gospel of John. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." I had read countless verses from the Quran about Jesus, yet never had I questioned them. He was called Isa al-Masih, the Messiah, born of a virgin, a miracle worker. But why was his title Messiah? What did that truly mean? If he was only a prophet, why was he given a role unlike any other? That night, I sat in my study, the Quran opened before me, but my eyes drifted to another book lying untouched on the shelf, a Bible. It had been a gift from a Christian acquaintance years ago, one I had accepted out of courtesy, but never dared to read. Now my hands trembled as I reached for it. The moment I opened it, I felt as if I had crossed an invisible threshold. A part of me feared that I was betraying everything I had once stood for, but another part of me whispered, "If truth is what you seek, you must be willing to look everywhere." I turned to the Gospel of Matthew and began to read. The words were unlike anything I had ever encountered. Jesus spoke with an authority that captivated me. His teachings on love, forgiveness, and grace were so radically different from the rigid laws I had spent my life following. As I read through the Sermon on the Mount, I felt something stirred deep within me. "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." The words struck me like a revelation. For years I had believed that obedience and ritual were the path to God, but Jesus spoke of something different, a relationship with God based on the heart, not just actions. I read late into the night, absorbing every word, my mind racing with questions. Could it be that I had misunderstood faith all along? Could it be that God was not a distant ruler to be feared, but a loving father who desired a relationship with his children? The thought both terrified and comforted me. I closed the Bible, pressing my hands to my face. I wasn't ready to accept anything yet, but I knew one thing. I could not ignore this any longer. A door had been opened, and I had stepped through it. There was no turning back. The days that followed were filled with an intense inner battle. I tried to return to my usual prayers, hoping that familiarity would bring me peace. But something had shifted inside me. The words I had once recited with conviction now felt hollow. My heart no longer connected with the rituals that had once defined my faith. I felt as if I was caught between two worlds, one I had always known, and one I was just beginning to glimpse. I struggled with guilt. Islam had been my life, my foundation, my very identity. How could I even entertain the idea that it might not be the complete truth? What if I was being deceived? What if this was a test from Allah, meant to see if I would remain faithful? The thought haunted me. Yet at the same time, another voice whispered, "What if this is the truth you have been searching for?" I kept reading the Bible in secret, drawn to the words of Jesus like a man thirsting for water. His words were unlike anything I had ever encountered. There was power in them, a truth that resonated deep in my soul. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Those words stopped me in my tracks. I had spent my entire life striving, obeying, fearing. But what if faith was not about striving, but about coming to God as a child comes to his father? At night, I would walk through my garden, lost in thought. The stars above seemed different now, as if they too were watching my journey unfold. My mind returned to my vision, the bound prophet, the voice questioning my understanding of Allah, the Quran falling open to reveal things I had never considered. Could it be that God had been leading me here all along? That the vision was not meant to scare me, but to awaken me? One evening, as I sat alone, I whispered the words that had been forming in my heart for days. "Jesus, if you are real, show me." The moment the words left my lips, I felt something shift. A warmth filled the air, a presence so overwhelming that tears welled in my eyes. I had prayed to Allah thousands of times, yet never had I felt something like this. It was as if I had spoken, and someone had truly heard me. I didn't have all the answers yet. I was still afraid of what this meant for my life, my family, my community. But for the first time, I wasn't just questioning, I was listening. And something deep inside me knew that the truth was drawing near. The next morning I awoke feeling different, lighter, somehow. As if a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying had begun to lift. I had expected to feel fear after my whispered prayer the night before, but instead I felt peace. Not the peace that comes from ignoring questions, but the peace that comes from stepping into something real. For the first time in my life, I felt as if I was being led, rather than simply following. I continued reading the Bible, but now, I wasn't just studying it, I was encountering it. Each word felt personal, as if it had been written for me. Jesus' parables spoke directly to my heart. The story of the prodigal son moved me to tears. I had always seen God as a master to be obeyed, but here was Jesus describing him as a father who runs to embrace his lost child. The image shook me. Had I been seeing God all wrong? I thought of all the years I had spent striving, trying to be good enough, trying to earn God's favor. But Jesus spoke of grace, something I had never fully understood. He said that God's love was not something we could earn through deeds, but something freely given. Could it really be that simple? That God loved me? Not because of what I did, but because of who he was? The idea terrified me. If it were true, it would change everything. It would mean that I had spent my life chasing something that had been freely available all along. And yet, deep inside, I felt my heart responding to it. One evening, I closed my eyes and whispered, "God, I don't know where this path leads, but I want to know you. Not through rituals, not through fear, but truly know you." I felt warmth surround me, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never known before, the love of God. I was no longer just searching for truth. I was finding it, and the truth was unlike anything I had ever expected. Despite the peace I was beginning to feel, fear still held me captive. The weight of what this journey meant for my life, my family, and my community was suffocating. I had spent decades as an imam, a leader, someone people turned to for guidance. If I openly embraced this new path, what would become of me? What would my wife say? My children? My congregation? Late at night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with scenarios. I imagined the disappointment in my wife's eyes, the anger of my eldest son, the whispers of the community as they labeled me a traitor. I had seen what happened to those who left Islam. Some were cast out, disowned by their families, abandoned by everyone they loved. Others faced worse: threats, exile, even death. Was I truly willing to risk it all? I thought of the people I had counseled, those who had confided in me over the years, sharing their doubts and fears. I had always given them the same answer. Faith is not about understanding, it is about obedience. But now I saw how empty those words had been. Faith without understanding was not true faith. It was fear disguised as devotion. I had lived my entire life obeying, never questioning, never truly seeking. But now, I was seeing God in a way I never had before. One evening, as I sat in my study, I found myself gripping my old prayer beads, my fingers tightening around them. It was as if I were holding on to the last pieces of the life I had known. If I let go, what would remain? Would I be alone? Would God still be there? I had spent my life clinging to certainty, but now I was stepping into the unknown. Then, a thought entered my mind. Perhaps faith is not about clinging to certainty, but about trusting God even when everything is uncertain. For the first time, I understood the words of Jesus when he said, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you always." Was this what it meant to truly have faith? To step forward even when you didn't have all the answers? I closed my eyes and whispered, "God, I am afraid. But if this is your truth, if Jesus is truly who he says he is, then I cannot run from it. Give me the strength to follow, no matter the cost." At that moment, a strange thing happened. I felt my grip on my old life loosen. The fear didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled me. I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet, but I knew one thing. I could not stay where I was. I had to move forward. The more I studied, the clearer things became. The life of Jesus, his death and resurrection, the message of salvation. It all made sense in a way I had never allowed myself to see before. The Quran spoke of Jesus, but it never explained why he was called the Messiah. It never explained why he alone was born of a virgin, why he performed miracles that no other prophet had done, or why he was taken up to heaven alive. I read the Gospels with new eyes, and the truth hit me like a flood. Jesus was not just a prophet. He was the Son of God. The sacrifice he made was not just another story. It was the key to everything. He did not come to establish another religion, another set of rules to follow. He came to restore mankind's relationship with God. This realization was both beautiful and terrifying. It was beautiful because for the first time, I saw God not as a distant master, but as a loving father who desired to know me. But it was terrifying because it meant I could no longer live in two worlds. I had to choose. One night, I found myself kneeling in my room, my heart pounding. I knew what I had to do, but fear still lingered. I thought of my wife, my children, my community. Would they understand? Or would they see me as a traitor? Would I lose them? I had heard stories of converts who had been disowned by their families, cast out with nowhere to go. Was I ready for that? I thought of the words Jesus spoke to his disciples. "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." The truth of those words shook me. Was I willing to give up everything for the truth? I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. "Jesus," I whispered, "if you are the truth, I choose you. I don't know what will happen next, but I trust you. I surrender everything to you." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The burden I had carried for so long, the weight of fear, of doubt, of trying to be good enough, it lifted. A deep peace filled me, a peace I had never known before. I had made my decision. There was no turning back. The next morning I woke up feeling different. The fear that had paralyzed me was gone. I knew there would be consequences for my decision, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had found something worth losing everything for. The first person I told was my wife. We sat in the garden, the same place where she had first asked me what was troubling me. I took her hands in mine, my heart pounding. "Fatima," I said gently, "There is something I need to tell you." She looked at me, concern filling her eyes. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. "I have been searching, questioning, and I have found something. Something I cannot deny." My voice trembled, but I pressed on. "I believe Jesus is the truth. I have chosen to follow him." Silence filled the air between us. For a moment I feared she would scream, that she would call me a traitor, that she would walk away. But instead, she just stared at me, her eyes filled with shock and sorrow. "Ahmet," she whispered, "what have you done?" I reached for her hands, but she pulled away. "I don't expect you to understand right now," I said, my voice breaking. "But please, just listen. I love you, and I don't want to lose you. But I cannot deny what I have found." Tears welled in her eyes. "You are not the man I married," she whispered. Her words cut deep, but I knew this was only the beginning. My journey had led me to truth, but it had also led me to the hardest moment of my life. The days that followed were filled with tension. Fatima was distant, barely speaking to me. My children sensed something was wrong. My eldest son, Kareem, confronted me one evening. "Father, what is happening? Mother is crying, you look different. Tell me the truth." I met his gaze, my heart heavy. "Kareem, I have found something that has changed me. I have chosen to follow Jesus." His face paled, his hands clenched into fists. "You are abandoning us. You are abandoning everything." "No, my son," I said softly. "I have found the truth, and I want you to seek it too." His eyes filled with anger. "I have no father," he spat before storming out of the room. The weight of rejection crushed me, but even through the pain, a peace remained. I had found the truth, and no matter the cost, I could not turn back. The days following my confession were the hardest of my life. My home, once filled with warmth and love, now felt like a place of exile. Fatima avoided me, speaking only when necessary. My children were distant, their eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Kareem refused to acknowledge my presence, his silence cutting deeper than any words ever could. I had prepared myself for rejection, but nothing could have truly readied me for the pain of seeing my own family slip away. At the mosque, rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that I had lost my mind, that the illness had weakened me, made me vulnerable to deception. Others were more direct, calling me a traitor, a disgrace. A man I had once called my closest friend refused to look at me when we passed on the street. The community I had served for decades now regarded me as an outsider, a stranger in the very place I had once called home. Despite everything, I felt an unshakable peace. There was a certainty in my heart that I had never known before. In the past, my faith had been built on duty, on obedience, on fear. Now, it was built on something far greater, a relationship with the living God. I no longer prayed out of obligation, but out of love. I no longer feared death, because I knew the one who had conquered it. One evening, as I sat alone in my study, my youngest daughter, Amira, quietly entered the room. She hesitated for a moment before sitting across from me. Her face was filled with uncertainty, but also something else. Curiosity. "Baba," she whispered, "do you really believe Jesus is the truth?" I met her gaze, my heart swelling with love. "Yes, my child," I said. "I believe with all my heart." She was silent for a long time, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "Mother says we must pray for you to return to the right path." I sighed, feeling the weight of my family's pain. "I know this is difficult for all of you," I said gently, "but I have found something that I cannot ignore. Amira, I don't want you to believe something just because I do. I want you to seek the truth for yourself. Ask the hard questions. Search with an open heart." Her eyes searched mine, looking for something. Perhaps doubt, hesitation, but she found none. I was no longer the man who had lived in fear of questioning. I was free. She nodded slowly. "I don't know if I understand, but I will think about it." It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The seeds of truth had been planted, and I knew that God would water them in His time. As I watched her leave the room, I realized something profound. This journey was not just mine. It was bigger than me. I had stepped into something eternal, something unbreakable. The cost had been great, but the reward was far greater. I had lost much, but I had gained everything. I was no longer an imam. I was no longer bound by fear. I was a child of God, and I was finally, truly free. Looking back, I see that my journey was never about losing my faith. It was about finding the truth. For years, I had lived in a system of rules, rituals, and obligations, believing that my worth was tied to how well I obeyed. But the truth is that faith is not about striving to be good enough. It is about knowing the one who is good. Jesus did not come to give us another set of laws to follow. He came to set us free. I know that many of you watching this may be where I once was, filled with questions but afraid to ask them. Maybe you have doubts, but you push them aside because you fear what they might lead to. Or maybe you feel something stirring in your heart, a longing for something more, something deeper. If that is you, I want to encourage you. Do not be afraid to seek the truth. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That promise is for you. If my story has spoken to you, if you find yourself searching, I invite you to take the next step. Open the Bible. Read the words of Jesus for yourself. Ask God to reveal himself to you. And if you are ready, if you feel him calling you, know that you do not have to walk this journey alone. He is waiting for you with open arms. This is not just my story. It can be yours too. I was once bound by fear, but now I live in freedom. I was once lost, but now I am found. And that same transformation is possible for you. If you have questions, if you need prayer, or if you simply want to share your journey, I encourage you to reach out. Leave a comment, share your story, and let's walk this path together. If this message has touched you, subscribe to this channel and follow Jesus. Stay connected because there is so much more to discover, and I want to walk this journey with you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And more than anything, thank you for opening your heart. May you find the truth, may you find peace, and may you find the one who has been waiting for you all along. God bless you, and I will see you in the next video.